They were so hungry that they ate her with potatoes. 16-year-old Karina was from Russia and she was dating 20-year-old Maxim, who was the lead singer of his band. She was so in love with him that she would sneak around to see him so that her mom wouldn't catch her. On this specific day, Karina told her mom that she was going to be spending the night at a friend's house so that she could study, when in reality she was going to be spending the night at her boyfriend's house. Her mom told her it was fine, but that she needed to be back home by 7 a.m. the next morning, but sadly that wouldn't be the case. In January of 2009, Maxim and his friends decided that they were going to host a party at his house, and Karina wanted to be there and spend the night. During the night of that party, everything seemed like it was going well. It was a lot of fun, and one of Maxim's roommates named Ekaterina was going to walk to her bedroom to go to sleep when she noticed that Maxim and Karina went into the bathroom together. After a while, she started to hear splashes of water and noise, but didn't think too much of it. A while later, Ekaterina woke up and noticed that they were still in the bathroom, so she decided she was going to check in on them to make sure that they were okay. And as she was walking towards that bathroom, another friend named Yuri told her that she wouldn't want to go in there. Ekaterina figured that nothing serious was going on, so she just went back to bed. Next day, Ekaterina arrived home from work. Maxim and Yuri offered her some meat and potatoes, so she ate her meal and didn't have any complaints. But this meat wasn't any kind of ordinary meat. It was the meat of Karina. The night before, Maxim and Yuri had put Karina in the bathtub, drowned her, and once she was deceased, they chopped her up, cooked her meat, and prepared it as a meal. Eventually, Maxim and Yuri were caught, and when they were interrogated, they were asked on why they even did this in the first place, and they stated it was because they were drunk and hungry. The rest of Karina's body parts were placed in plastic bags and scattered around the city. Maxim and Yuri were arrested and charged with Karina's murder.
Do you guys remember the creepy Ori Chef Facebook incident? For years, people spoke about it because this profile would post really disturbing things, and people would think that this person might not be real because of the disturbing things that were found. Around 2013 through 2015, a lot of people noticed this creepy profile by the name Ori Chef Marjorie. I think I said that right. It was absolutely unsettling because it had no friends, like no pictures. Well, she had pictures, but no family, nothing. It was just a picture of her with no expression, and it almost looked generated. It was absolutely too smooth, too perfect. It seemed like something straight from Uncanny Valley. But here's where it gets disturbing. Many people said that Ori Chef actually friend requested them, and even if their accounts were private, I think she was able to add them as a friend, and if you accepted the invite, she would send you messages. The thing is, right after you accepted it, your mutual started getting same request from multiple accounts that seemed to be like her with the same profile. Like anything else, there were so many rumors, but the creepiest thing is that her profile or her face was actually identical to someone or belonged to someone who went missing years ago. I think some people even swore that she posted weird cannibalistic things. I didn't see the profile and I couldn't find any pictures, but if you remember this, let me know in the comments.
She was caught making tamales out of women. Anabel Gomez Lopez was from Mexico City and she was a very well-known tamale maker. She would often sell her tamales outside of a subway station and no one really knew what the meat consisted of. One day, a gas leak had seeped through the walls of her home, which caused a horrible smell. This smell was so strong that a neighbor had smelled it, panicked, and called police. Once police had arrived to the home, they were met with a gruesome scene. Right there in the living room were the bones of a young woman who had been stripped from her flesh and meat. So the secret ingredient that Anabel was using for her tamales was the meat of women. For years, Anabel would prey on young women and lure them back into her home with the promise of food and shelter. The reason Anabel had did this in the first place was because she had spent all of her money and wasn't able to buy the meat for the tamales. That was until Anabel had came across this young girl who was looking for her parents and was lost. Anabel had told this young girl that she could go back to her home and call her parents with her phone, but of course Anabel had other sinister plans. Anabel had admitted to doing this to 50 women to use as meat for her tamales. She clearly had no remorse and stated that the only reason she got caught was because of that gas leak. Her defense attorney tried to argue that she was mentally ill because she heard a voice in her head telling her to use these women as meat. As a result, Anabel was sentenced to 25 years in prison.
Did you know that there is a castle outside of Prague in the Czech Republic that was designed to keep something in? This castle is Huska Castle, and unlike traditional castles, this one doesn't have a kitchen or running water or bed chambers, and all of the fortifications turn inwards rather than outwards. This castle is built on a cliff edge, and it is also built on top of a huge crack or a fissure that seems to have no bottom. This hole became known as the Hole to Hell. It was seen as a gateway to hell by local villagers. They said that at nighttime they would hear the screams of thousands of people being tortured coming from this fissure. Not only that, but the villagers said that creatures that were half human, half animal used to crawl from this crack in the earth at nighttime. These creatures would steal and consume livestock, children, anybody who got in their way, and then they would disappear back into this hole in the ground before sunrise. So allegedly this castle was built in order to ensure that whatever was in that hole in the ground would stay there. And to be doubly extra sure, they built a chapel directly over the hole in the ground itself. There are so many interesting layers to this story, including a bit where a prisoner was lowered down into this hole in the ground in order to see what was at the bottom, and he didn't reach the bottom, but he did frantically call for them to pull him back up, and when they pulled him back up to the surface, his hair had gone white. He was old and wrinkly, even though he had gone down into the hole as a young man, and he had been driven mad by whatever he had seen. This story is so fun and interesting, and I released an entire podcast episode about it today called Huska Castle. My podcast is Real Life Ghost Stories, and you can find it wherever you get your podcasts.
These famous ghost hunters vanished, and the truth was more disturbing than any conspiracy. It was autumn 2015 in Reno, Nevada. Couple Debbie and Mark Constantino shared a very unique interest. Mark was a registered parapsychologist, which basically meant that he studied the paranormal, and Debbie was a paranormal conference lecturer. They got married in the late 80s and ended up having 3 daughters together. Now, tragically, one of their children actually did pass away when she was just a baby. This obviously deeply affected them, but they were somewhat comforted knowing that potentially their daughter could come through from the afterlife. From the outside looking in, it seemed like they were a match made in heaven, right? So why not work together too? Ghost Adventures is a very successful paranormal investigation show. It's still running to this day, and the pair became a regular feature. They would be like presenters. They were almost celebrities in their own field. But I guess with that came a kind of pressure on them to be this perfect couple. And by the sounds of it, behind the scenes, Debbie really wasn't happy. She confided in her friends like, Mark keeps telling me to get plastic surgery, and I can't imagine how horrible that must be. Having someone that you love tell you that you're not perfect, you need to change. And this was just the tip of the iceberg. Friends would hear really horrible arguments between the pair of them. Debbie would call Mark's exes really derogatory names, and she would just be jealous and aggressive. And Mark would really put Debbie down, like already kind of insinuated, and try and make her feel insecure. They were constantly bickering in front of people, and everyone was kind of like, God, if they're doing this in front of us, what must it be like when nobody's watching? And it truly was getting worse and worse, to the point that in 2012, Mark actually rang police. He said he was terrified. His story was that Debbie was drunk and threatening to stab him. She spent the night in a cell for this, but it wouldn't be the last time. Things rumbled on beneath the surface until 2015, when the exact same thing apparently happened. Again, Mark called police saying, she's threatening to stab me. But then something even crazier happened. Debbie had to take a protective order out against Mark and said that he basically lured her to the daughter's apartment, and then him and the daughter waited and pounced on Debbie and the roommate that she showed up with. They beat her and choked her unconscious. And it does sound like it was a very callous, planned attack, some kind of sick revenge, I guess. Now, she finally filed for divorce, and people were like, okay, good. Clearly this is a very toxic and dangerous relationship. And finally, they're both going to be able to get their separate lives back on track. But late September, things would come to an end in the most devastating way. Now, the pair had broken up by this point. Debbie was living with roommates and had moved out of the family home. But suddenly, James, Debbie's roommate, was found dead. This was James Anderson. He was known as Jimmy to his friends, and he was known as being an absolutely lovely guy. And another roommate just came home that day to find him lying on the floor. At first she was like, oh my God, is he unconscious? Then she realized, oh my God, no, he's got a gunshot wound to the head. And like I said, Jimmy was a lovely guy. He had no enemies, so this made no sense. Then something clicked. Debbie was missing. Had Jimmy been caught in the crossfire? Was he just collateral damage? Was it a case of wrong place, wrong time? Because do you know who also was missing? Mark. Police were like, right, we have to locate these two. We know they're extremely toxic and dangerous together. There's a good chance that one of them is in serious danger. Now they traced the pair's phones, and lo and behold, the phones were traveling together. And they actually ended up at the daughter's apartment. The same daughter that helped her dad beat up Debbie. SWAT teams raced over there, wasting no time. They were like, it's pretty clear he's killed the roommate and then kidnapped her. The clock was ticking. Could they get to her before it was too late? Now, they surrounded the building where the daughter's apartment was, and suddenly they heard gunshots. Someone was firing at them, and it was pretty clear who it was. Suddenly, they heard the unmistakable voice of Mark. I mean, everyone knew him off the TV. He was yelling at them to stay back. It must be so scary for these SWAT teams in this situation. Like, they need to make sure that they act fast, but they also need to tread incredibly carefully. Hours went by. They tried to negotiate with him. They thought it was working. They were pleading. They were like, can we do anything to have a good resolution here? Then Mark stopped replying. They decided there's nothing else for it. We need to use explosives to get inside of there. They blew open the door, but tragically found them both dead inside. Mark and Debbie both on the floor. Mark had unalived them both. And we'll never truly know exactly what went down. Some people believe that Debbie would only have actually gone with Mark if he was holding a gun to her head, and we know he had a weapon. Some people wonder what Mark had against Jimmy, or whether he was just collateral damage.
A case that will forever terrify me is the unsolved disappearance of the Springfield Three. Because what do you mean 3 women all disappeared from one house in the middle of the night without leaving behind one single clue? No sign of a struggle outside of the front porch light being shattered. Everything was exactly the way they had left it, yet 3 entire women just gone. That was 34 years ago, yet this is an unsolved case that many people still talk about because nothing about it makes any sense. This is the disturbing disappearance of the Springfield Three, and it's one that genuinely makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. So let's talk about it. This is Cheryl Levitt. She was a 47-year-old hairdresser who lived at 1717 East Delmar Street in Springfield, Missouri. She lived here with her 19-year-old daughter named Susie, and they were super close. Everyone who knew them said they had such a loving relationship, and by all accounts, life was pretty normal for them. They moved into this house in the spring of 1992, and outside of some pretty disturbing prank phone calls, this was their little oasis. On June 6, 1992, Susie and one of her best friends, Stacy McCall, graduated from high school. And it was a day that should have marked the beginning of the rest of their lives. But within 24 hours, Susie, Stacy, and Cheryl would all vanish into thin air, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. So the 2 girls graduated at around 4 p.m. that day, and the ceremony was being held at Missouri State University's campus. In the audience was Cheryl, a proud mother watching her only daughter graduate. After the ceremony, their high school was hosting an all-night locked-in party inside the school, which a lot of people attended. But Susie and Stacy declined as they were going to a couple of other parties that night. The first stop of the night was to their friend's house in Battlefield. Her name was Janelle Kirby. Janelle's family was hosting a big family dinner with a bunch of out-of-town relatives staying the night, so it was a pretty big celebration. After dinner, Susie, Stacy, and Janelle went to Janelle's neighbor's house who was hosting the first party of the night. The Kirbys made sure to tell Susie's mom Cheryl exactly where the girls were so that if she needed anything, she knew where to call, but she never did. Cheryl was even invited to the Kirbys' dinner, but she decided to stay home instead and paint and varnish some furniture. The last time Cheryl was ever heard from was around 11:15 that night. She had talked to one of her friends on the phone talking about how she was just staying in and having a cozy night in her bedroom. And while the other 2 girls went about their night having fun, this would be the last time Cheryl would ever be heard from again. So fast forward to after the first party. Once that was over, Janelle, Stacy, and Susie all carpooled to some other little parties in Springfield. As the night went on, the girls put together this big plan for all of them and their friends to meet up the next morning at 8 a.m. to go to Whitewater, which was a water park in Branson, Missouri. The plan was really set in stone, and it was going to be a really fun way to kick off post-graduation life. And at this party, everyone seemed normal. The girls were having fun, rekindling old friendships, and making plans for the next few days, so nothing out of the ordinary. Just before 2 a.m., the last party that the girls were at was busted by Springfield police, so they all carpooled back to Janelle's house where they initially planned to stay the night. But since Janelle's house was packed full with her out-of-town relatives, Stacy and Susie decided to actually just head back to Susie's house house to spend the rest of the night with her mom, Cheryl. This worked out great because Susie was super excited to show Stacy this brand new king-size waterbed she just got. And as the two were leaving, Janelle's mom heard Susie say, quote, "Follow me to my house," end quote, in which Stacy replied, quote, "Okay, I will." End quote. It's assumed that they both did in fact make it back to Susie's house, as both of their cars were parked in the driveway, as well as the rest of their personal belongings. But what happened after the girls got home has never been explained. This brings us to June 7th, 1992. It was now 9 a.m., so an hour past the time Stacy and Susie were supposed to meet up with their friends to go to the water park. This really worried Janelle because they were both really responsible and wouldn't just leave her without saying anything. So Janelle and her boyfriend actually went to Susie and Cheryl's home at 1717 East Delmar, expecting to find them there. Janelle noticed the front door was unlocked, so she went in, but absolutely nobody was there. This seemed really weird to her because all of their cars were still parked out front. Nothing really seemed out of the ordinary besides the front porch light being shattered. The bulb itself was still intact, but the glass lampshade that covered it was what was broken. So the next detail I'm about to say is a little odd, but I guess Janelle was barefoot at the time, so she and her boyfriend decided to sweep up the broken glass that was on the front porch and throw it away. It was an innocent thing they tried to do, but we would later find that this action would possibly destroy any potential evidence, as this was an active crime scene. As Janelle was roaming the house, she found Susie and Cheryl's pet Yorkie, Cinnamon, who seemed really agitated. And as Janelle was about to leave the house, a series of phone calls came through on the home phone, so Janelle answered. She said this person sounded like a teen guy, and he was saying some really disturbing sexual things, on top of profusely cussing. Every time the phone rang, it was this unidentified guy, and Janelle would hang up right away because what he was saying was very jarring. At the time, though, Janelle really didn't think much of it because she remembered Susie complaining about similar disturbing prank phone calls ever since she and her mom had moved into the house in that spring. So without finding anyone, Janelle and her boyfriend left, and instead of going to Whitewater, they went to a local water park instead. On top of not showing up to the water park, Susie was supposed to call her close friend and co-worker Nigel, but she never did. When he showed up to find out what was going on, though, something immediately stood out to him. Nigel described Susie as a creature of habit and said that every single day she would always park her car in the same exact spot in the driveway, which was under the carport. That morning, when people started showing up to look for the three women, Susie's car wasn't parked in her usual spot. It was further up the driveway, which was not normal. Although alarm bells started ringing, Nigel was really hoping this would have a good explanation. Maybe someone else was just parked in her spot under the carport when she and Stacy arrived home that night after the party. But this is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the disturbing mystery surrounding this case. A few hours later, Stacy's mom begins to panic as well. She wasn't able to get a hold of her, and she knew a couple of employees at Whitewater that confirmed that neither of the girls ever showed up and checked in. So Stacy's mom actually went to Cheryl's home just like Janelle, and she found the door unlocked too. When she let herself inside, their Yorkie Cinnamon came barreling towards her. Poor Cinnamon was just going crazy inside the house, like she was barking and crying like something was really wrong. Stacy's mom continued walking through the house and found something odd. All three of the women's purses were sitting on the floor of Susie's bedroom. Cheryl had a $900 cash deposit from her salon still inside her purse, and what's super creepy is that she found Stacy's pants, socks, and jacket folded neatly inside the room. These were the clothes her daughter was wearing just the night before, and Stacy didn't have any other clothes on her besides this outfit. But what's creepy is that her shirt and underwear were missing from the scene. As creepy as it was, though, it literally looked as if all three women just stepped outside and would be right back, like time was frozen still. There were recently used makeup wipes from the girls sitting next to their jewelry and keys, and Cheryl's cigarettes were still inside the house. That tiny detail doesn't seem that weird until you learn that Cheryl was a chain smoker, and she never left anywhere without having her cigarettes on her. What really disturbs me, though, which I'm sure is just a coincidence, is that the book Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss was sitting on Susie's headboard. I don't know too many 19-year-olds who still have those books just laying around. But then again, this could just be a red herring, so to speak. The lights were off in Susie's bedroom, but the TV was on, just blaring static. It's likely the girls maybe watched a movie or something that night when they got home and just forgot to turn the TV off, which caused the static, but it's still really creepy to me. It also creeps Stacy's mom out to the point where she was now in full-blown panic mode. So she called the police directly from Cheryl and Susie's home phone to report the three women missing. After she called, she noticed that there was a message left on their answering machine, so she listened to it. What's super frustrating is that the voicemail was accidentally erased after she listened to it just that one time. But Stacy's mom described it as incredibly strange and even threatening. I guess it was common back then for answering machines in the 90s to erase the message after it played once, but it's just really unfortunate in this case because police believe that this message may have provided a clue and was possibly linked to the 3 women's disappearance. One thing they did clarify though was that they don't believe this specific voicemail was related to the many prank phone calls the home had received prior. So on top of the 911 call being placed roughly 16 hours after Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy were last seen, the crime scene was also horrendously contaminated. Not only did Janelle and her boyfriend clean up potential evidence, and Stacy's mom erasing that creepy voicemail, after the women were reported missing, about 20 of their worried friends and family showed up to the home to tidy up. Even though they were actively missing at this point, I'm sure they thought that they would just show back up and that nothing was really wrong. So they cleaned up. They emptied ashtrays, washed coffee cups. I mean, anything you can think of to clean, they probably did it. By the time Springfield police arrived on the scene, several people were just walking in and out of the house and yard, and the front door was wide open, so the crime scene was very contaminated, and any potential evidence left behind was just destroyed. Based on early testimony though, and from their own investigation, there was really no sign of a struggle except for that one broken front porch light. Cheryl's bed looked slept in, and one of the window blinds was awkwardly bent, which kind of stood out too. Everything of Susie, Cheryl's, and Stacy's was left behind, including driver's licenses, money, keys, jewelry, medicine, and even poor little Cinnamon. Police say the women were most likely abducted, and that little Cinnamon was likely the only witness to their disappearance. Investigators were really hoping that these women would just show back up, but in the following days, all 3 women had appointments and work that they needed to show up to, but they didn't. It was radio silence. This kickstarted a massive search for them, which included hundreds of volunteers, police, tracking dogs, and even helicopters. But it was like they just vanished into thin air. Literally no sign of them was ever found, not even the clothes that they were wearing that night. This was a really high-profile case at the time, so everyone knew about it, and it didn't take long for a possible lead to come in. Around the time of their disappearance, multiple people witnessed a brown Dodge van driving near the home. It seemed out of place, and a couple people even saw who they thought could be Susie driving the van looking absolutely terrified. Some even claimed to have heard a man yelling at her from the inside of the van. Although this seemed like a good lead, this brown van was never tracked down, and it ultimately led nowhere. In December of 1992, a man called the America's Most Wanted hotline with information about the Springfield 3's disappearance. I guess this was prime knowledge that no one should have known unless they committed the crime. But as the switchboard operator tried to transfer the call to the Springfield Police Department, the call disconnected. As a result, Springfield PD pleaded publicly for this man to come forward and tell them this information, but he never did. A few years later, this case would be turned upside down once again with some pretty disturbing information. So kind of tying into the brown van sighting, a man named Chuck Kassler commented on a blog post about this case with some pretty startling information. Chuck went on to say that he was around 17 years old when these disappearances took place, and he may have witnessed the women being abducted. That night, Chuck and one of his friends snuck out into the woods near Winoka Camp, which also just so happened to be near Cheryl and Susie's home, aka the crime scene. Chuck went on to say that he and his friend heard screams and crying coming from inside the house, and then they saw 3 women being loaded off of a brown van. He said he then saw horrible things being done to them near Winoka Camp before he and his friend took off. Chuck's comment attracted a lot of attention because it really lined up with the brown van sighting, but a lot of people didn't believe him for a few reasons. I guess the road to Winoka Camp is really narrow, so a large brown van like the one everyone saw likely went to fit on that back road. Winoka Camp was also a super popular spot for people to go and hang out, especially on graduation night. There should have been more people there who likely would have seen the same thing as Chuck, and it's also just a really risky spot to commit a crime. People also question why Chuck nor his friend ever said anything to police, or anyone at all for that matter, until years later. He said he was scared and that's why, but some people think the fact that he didn't try to help or report this to anyone is sketchy. Regardless, not long after Chuck made this comment about this case, he ended his own life, which is another weird aspect to this case. In 1997, Cheryl and Susie were officially declared legally dead, even though none of them have ever been found. Fast forward to 2007. This is when investigators received a disturbing tip. The tip was that the women's bodies were buried in the foundation of the south parking garage at Cox Hospital. So Kathy Baird, who is a crime reporter, teamed up with a mechanical engineer to scan the corner of the parking garage with ground-penetrating radar. When they did, they shockingly found 3 anomalies anomalies roughly the same size, and this was consistent with a gravesite location. 2 of the anomalies were parallel and 1 was perpendicular. So this seems like a great lead, right? Well, Springfield police say that this tip came from a psychic or someone who had a dream about this case. And although 3 anomalies were found there was no logical reasoning behind this theory, no physical evidence. And it's been reported that this parking garage began construction about a year after the Springfield 3 went missing. So with all of that combined, Springfield PD has refused to tear this down or dig anything up to investigate. They say it's too spendy to do all of this on nothing, and that this isn't a credible enough lead. Although it is risky and costly to do this, and the timeline seems just a hair off, part of me wonders if the women have really been buried there this entire time. Sadly though, nothing has been done about it, and all 3 of them remain missing. And although we don't know what exactly happened to them or who was responsible, there are a few theories and suspects. Theory number 1 is that they were all abducted, which is likely the case. But how and why is the question. Did someone follow the girls home from one of the parties that night? Did one of them get abducted leaving the Kirby residence and then forced to go home? And then all 3 of them were abducted just because? Was it a targeted kidnapping? If so, why did all 3 of them go missing then? Or did someone break into the home when it was just Cheryl there, and then the girls walked in on it while the crime was being committed? Or was this just a random break-in/robbery that just happened to escalate? Either way, why was there absolutely no sign of a struggle or any blood left behind? How did all 3 of them vanish all at once? It seems like it would take more than one person to overpower all 3 of them without leaving any evidence behind. But with this theory, there are a few suspects. Suspect number 1 is Dustin Rekla, Susie's ex-boyfriend. A few months before they disappeared, Dustin broke into a Springfield mausoleum and stole $30 worth of gold fillings from a human skull. After he was caught, Susie gave statements against him to the police, and she was also going to be a probable witness in court. This seems like a reason that he could have wanted revenge against her, but it just doesn't make sense why he would kidnap the other 2 women. But Dustin and the 2 friends that helped him in the robbery were in the area the night the women disappeared. So there's that. Suspect number 2 is Larry Hall, a suspected serial killer and convicted kidnapper and rapist. Larry would often travel around the Midwest for historical reenactments of the Civil War. He is believed to have abducted, tortured, and killed dozens of girls and women. On the morning and afternoon of June 6th, Larry had 2 battle reenactments at Wilson's Creek National Battlefield, which is 5 minutes away from the Kirby residence where Susie and Stacy were at that night. After Larry was arrested for another vicious crime, a former FBI agent actually went undercover and befriended him in prison. Larry confided in him a bunch of really disturbing details about his several murders that only the killer would know. He also kept a map of where all of his victims were abducted and killed. But sadly, the FBI agent blew his cover, and Larry destroyed this map before anyone could grab it. So it's not known if the Springfield 3 were included in this or not, although some of the dates did line up. Suspect number 3 is a man named Robert Craig Cox. He is also a convicted kidnapper and robber, and he claimed to know that the 3 women had been killed, but that their bodies would never be found. Robert was living in Springfield at the time of the disappearances, and he was even interviewed when this case first broke. He gave conflicting alibis, so police don't know if he's telling the truth, or if he just wanted attention by giving false statements about this case. He has no real credibility, so again, nothing is really tying him to this case. But Robert did say that once his mom dies, he will give up the location of the women's bodies, which is really sad. As of today, this case remains unsolved, but it's definitely one of those stories that makes you question what the heck could have possibly happened. It's one thing for one person to vanish into thin air, but 3 people all at the same time? That's terrifying, and not one theory really makes any sense. But it's now been 34 years, and whatever really happened to the Springfield 3 that night remains a mystery.
She was missing for years until an episode of Unsolved Mysteries aired. It was the summer of 2017 in Illinois. 9-year-old Kayla Unbehorn was a very kind, sweet, but shy girl. She never made a fuss about anything. She was very, very reserved, very well behaved. And she was treasured by her dad, Ryan. Now, Ryan had originally met Kayla's mum, Heather, back in 2003. They hit it off straight away, had a totally normal relationship. A few years later, Heather fell pregnant with Kayla, and the pair were happy about it. They planned a future together. They were really excited, and they were like, right, as soon as Kayla is born, we'll get married. So you can imagine how blindsided Ryan was when the mum gave birth to Kayla and all of a sudden wanted nothing to do with Ryan. She just ended it and Ryan was heartbroken. But he was like, we'll have to make joint custody work for the sake of Kayla. You know, he adored his little girl. Eventually, as the years went on, he did move on with a woman called Lisa, and he regularly saw his little girl. But then Heather pulled the rug from underneath him yet again. She was like, me and Kayla are moving house to Georgia. Now, Georgia to Illinois is not just down the road. This is thousands of miles away. So he went to court. He was like, do you know what? We're going to need something like legally in writing. I'm not going to let you just remove her from my life. And even though the court did side with him and they did put an agreement in place, Heather didn't follow it. And suddenly, without warning, one day when she was supposed to drop Kayla off to Ryan, the pair of them vanished, mum and daughter, into thin air. And Ryan obviously had a hunch that Heather was responsible, but absolutely nobody could track her down anywhere. I can't imagine how powerless and how terrified he must have felt. He never gave up hope. He would tell anybody that he could about his missing daughter. He was trying to get the news out. He was trying anything to try and trace her. And that's why I personally find true crime content so helpful. People are interested in these stories, and for that reason we have TV shows like Unsolved Mysteries. This means people can share their stories and get answers. And in this case, it helped reunite this man with his baby. Now, the series Unsolved Mysteries covered Kayla's case on an episode, and a true crime girly just happened to see the episode. On an evening in May 2023, an employee at a clothing store in Westgate Regional Shopping Center in North Carolina rang police. She'd seen this girl in the shop with her mum and immediately recognized her from that broadcast. The program had shown an age progression picture. She was like, oh my God, that looks like this girl. Police showed up and they were like, oh my God, you absolutely did the right thing. This is the missing child. They arrested Heather for kidnap, and Ryan drove to North Carolina with tears in his eyes, about to reunite with his daughter. Heather was given a few years in prison, I believe, not long enough in my opinion, and Ryan and his wife got full custody of Kayla. She's around 17, 18 and is apparently thriving, living a totally normal teenage girl life.
This is the story of how that iguana on my shoulder saved me from being SA'd when I was 19. I was living with these 4 guys. We were all into partying, as you might see here on the table. And they were all at work. So I get a knock on the door and I go to answer the door, and it's one of our friends who is into procurement. I invite him in. He's a friend, not a foe. And I was like, have a seat. Can I get you anything? And he was like, I know what I want. I was like, oh no, I'm with Jason. You know, like he and I are together. He was like, well, he don't got to know what we don't tell him. He got up from where he was sitting because he was over here, and he came to the couch and he put his giant man hand on my leg and was like kind of moving it back. I took his hand, I stopped it, and I was like, wait, I think you got this all wrong. I took his hand and kind of removed it. Well, that made him mad. Kind of came back and grabbed my leg harder, and right about this time, he caught sight of this iguana. He was like, yo, what the hell is that? And I was like, oh, that's my iguana. And we did not keep her in like the aquarium or whatever. I said, they're really attracted to bright, shiny things. And this guy had like gold on. I was like, all that gold around your neck, like she might be attracted to that. He was like, can it jump? And I was like, oh yeah, they jump like 8 to 10, 12 feet. They can jump in one single leap, and they bite. Yeah, they're poisonous. He got like all uncomfortable, and he was like, is the thing gonna come over here? And I was like, yeah, she will. He was like, you know, I'm gonna leave. And so he left.
This little girl went over to her friend's house to have a sleepover, and that night very quickly turned into the worst night of her life when a very dangerous man snuck in through the window. The bravery of this girl is admirable, especially when you learn that she was only 10 years old. With that being said, we're talking about a child in today's video, so if you think that listening to this is going to harm your mental health in any way, shape, or form, please skip this video. I will see you in my next one. Take care of yourselves. I mean it. I love you. On New Year's Eve in 1999, 13-year-old Katie Harris was getting ready to have her friend over for a sleepover. Katie lived in Del Rio in Texas. She had 2 sisters and 1 brother, and the friend that she had invited over was 10-year-old Crystal Searles. Crystal was new to Del Rio. Her and her family were in the process of moving there, but they were still living in Kansas. Crystal had 2 little sisters. One of them was 7-year-old Mark Searles. So Katie has her friend Crystal, as well as her little sister Mark, come over to her house for a sleepover, and Crystal was so excited
excited. She couldn't wait to stay up late, eat snacks, play, watch movies, talk about boys, the whole thing. She was really looking forward to it. And Katie's house was a little bit more isolated, but in the way that her neighbors were just not super close to each other, the houses were more spread out and they were kind of in a deserted area. When the girls got there, they decided that Crystal and Katie were going to be sleeping in Katie's room where she had bunk beds, and Mark, Crystal's little sister, was going to be sleeping by herself in the spare bedroom directly across. Because she was younger, she was 7, the older girls wanted to stay up a little bit later and they didn't want to have to share the bunk beds with Mark because they didn't want her to ruin the fun. You know how kids are at that age. So they hang out and eventually the girls separate, go to their respective rooms to go to bed. Mark goes to the spare bedroom, Crystal and Katie stay in Katie's room. Katie was sleeping on the bottom bunk and Crystal was at the top. They fall asleep and the entire house is quiet, but outside in the dark, hiding in the shadows, is a man called Tommy Lynn Sells. He was getting ready to go and approach the house. Tommy Lynn Sells was a man with a big history of violence, and he actually knew the Harris family. The family befriended Tommy through their church, and when they met, it was clear that Tommy had some sort of deep-rooted issues. He was struggling with something. So the Harris family had gone out of their way to try and help him. Tommy had visited their house before. He knew the layout. He knew where the bedrooms were. He knew where everyone slept. And on this night, he had made plans to break into the house in the middle of the night with one specific target in mind, 13-year-old Katie Harris. And that's exactly what he did. At around 3:50 in the morning, he snuck in through the house through an open window and crept into the room where Katie and Crystal were sleeping. He saw Katie sleeping peacefully on the bottom bunk, and using the 12-inch that he had brought along with him, he held it up to Katie's throat before then he began to SA her. Katie woke up, of course, abruptly in full panic mode because there was a grown man standing over her with a knife held up to her throat. She immediately tried to put up a fight, pushing, kicking, screaming, but it's a 13-year-old girl trying to fight against a full-grown man. It didn't take much for him to overpower her. He grabbed her, covered her mouth, and then he slit her throat. He then stabbed her 16 more times until Katie stopped fighting and collapsed to the ground. Katie's screams, of course, woke up Crystal. And from the top bunk, she woke up and she saw Tommy. She remembers thinking that there was an evil look in his eyes. He had long, dark, scruffy hair and a bushy beard that covered most of his face. Crystal was frozen in fear, but she did her best to try and stay as still as possible, laying on the top bunk, hoping that the man would not see her. Tears were falling down her face in silence, knowing what the man was capable of, having just witnessed it firsthand, and having just seen the horrible things that were just done to her friend right in front of her. Crystal thought that she was safe when she saw Tommy about to walk out of the room, but he turned around one last time to take a look at the crime scene, and he saw Crystal staring right back at him. He rushed over to her as she was trying to scoot away from him on the top bunk, saying, quote, "I will be quiet, I promise," end quote, trying to think of anything that she could say or do to try and get him to leave. But it was clear that there was going to be absolutely no reasoning with this man. Crystal held up both of her hands to her neck to protect herself, but he pushed them away, and then he her throat. Crystal's natural thing to want to do was yell out for help, but she knew if there was any hope for her surviving this, the odds of her surviving would be slightly higher if she pretended to be dead to try and get the man to leave, and that's exactly what she did. She laid as still as she could, and Tommy finally walked out of the room. After he left, Crystal was still alive by a miracle, and she jumped off her bed onto the ground and rushed over to her best friend, Katie. All she wanted to do was hold Katie in her arms and tell her that everything was going to be okay, that she was going to get help, but when she tried to speak out loud, she realized that she couldn't because she had an injury across her neck from ear to ear. Crystal, and please remember that this girl was 10 years old at the time, she knew that she needed to go get help. However, she had no idea if Tommy was still in the house. She had no idea if she was in a different bedroom, making everyone in that house his victim. She didn't know. Panic set in quickly, and Crystal made the decision to leave the house and go find help. Barefoot, she walked outside, her hands up to her neck the entire time, trying to stop the She rushed over to the closest houses she saw. Every single second, it was getting harder and harder for her to breathe. But she saw a light and she just kept thinking, get to that house. All you have to do is just get to the house. It was about a quarter of a mile away, but she made it. And using the 1 ounce of energy that she had left, she started banging on the front door. A man answered, seeing this 10-year-old little girl, looking like she was seconds away from collapsing into the ground completely. Crystal still couldn't speak. I literally have goosebumps. So she grabbed a pen and paper and she wrote, "The Harrises are hurt. Tell them to hurry." And then she wrote another note. "My neck needs help. Will I live?" The man immediately called the police and Crystal was life flighted to the nearest hospital, back in Kansas where Crystal and Mark's mother was still living. At 6 in the morning, she received a phone call. It was the emergency room calling from the hospital. Crystal's mom, her name is Pam, she obviously had no idea what happened. All she knew was that her 7-year-old little girl, Mark, was saved, but her 10-year-old daughter, Crystal, was in very, very poor condition because she had just had her throat. Pam dropped everything and immediately headed over to the hospital to greet them. Around the same time, Texas Ranger Johnny Allen received the call. When he arrived at the Harris' home, he walked into a crime scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. 13-year-old Katie Harris lay deceased on her bedroom floor. Was everywhere on the walls, the floor, trailing through the house from where Crystal ran through trying to get help. It was truly haunting to see. The Texas Ranger knew that there was another victim, Crystal, and knew that she was in the hospital. He did not know the extent of her injuries yet, but he knew that she was their only hope as far as a surviving witness. Crystal's mom, Pam, made it to the hospital, and she walked in to see her daughter surrounded by tubes and machines and a ventilator breathing for her. But she was alive, and she had seen the face of the man, and she would be able to identify him. Despite her injuries, Crystal was able to give investigators a very detailed description of the attacker, a man with long, dark, scruffy hair, a big, bushy beard, dark, mean eyes. A sketch artist worked with Crystal to create a composite, and when the image was circulated among the friends and family of the Harrises, someone recognized him immediately, 35-year-old Tommy Lynn Sells. On January 2nd of 2000, just 2 days after the attack, police arrested Tommy Sells at a mobile home in Del Rio. When he was arrested, his first words to investigators were, quote, "I'm glad I finally got caught. I was tired of doing this," end quote. Tommy Sells confessed almost immediately. He even walked through the crime scene with investigators, demonstrating exactly in detail how he had climbed in through the window, attacked Katie, and then Crystal. So he was arrested, thankfully, but then on the drive to jail, Tommy saw something that shocked everyone. He said, quote, "I guess you want to know about the other murders," end quote. Over the next 9 months, Tommy Sells confessed to victim after victim after victim. He claimed to have more than 70 people across the United States, men, women, children. Police were able to identify at least 22 victims. Like I said, he had all different kinds of victims: mothers, children, teenage girls, and entire families. Years later, he was quoted saying, quote, "I am hatred. When you look at me, you look at hate. I don't know what love is. 2 words I don't like to use is love and sorry, because I'm about hate," end quote. But in the end, it was Crystal Sorrells, a 10-year-old little girl who refused to give up, who finally brought this evil man down. She was more than ready. She was terrified, but she was ready for when his trial took place, to stand there and be able to testify and bring justice not only to her friend Katie, but every other one of his victims. And by the way, if you were wondering, inside the Harris household that night, there were 6 other people in the house that night, but they were left unharmed, thankfully. Tommy has said that he thought about making those 6 people his victims as well, but ultimately decided not to. And Crystal's little sister Mark was so traumatized from hearing about what happened that night in the room just directly across from her, but she looked up to her older sister Crystal after that more than ever, knowing just how much bravery she showed that night. 9 months after the attack in September of 2000, Tommy Lynn Sells stood trial for the case of Katie Harris, the key witness being now 11-year-old Crystal Sorrells. It was the first time since the attack that Crystal would come face to face with Tommy Sells. Quote, "I just had a mindset that this is what I wanted to do and this is what I had to do. I put my thoughts towards Katie, like, this is for Katie, she deserves this," end quote. Crystal took the stand and she testified. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. And on September 18th of the year 2000, Tommy Lynn Sells was found guilty. 2 days later, he was sentenced to death. He was executed on April 3rd of 2014 at 6:27 p.m. For 2 years following the crime, Crystal and her 2 little sisters and her mom all slept in the same bed because she was so traumatized. And it comes to no one's surprise that Crystal had a very, very hard time trying to heal from everything that she experienced, but with the love and support from her family, she slowly started doing what she could to feel some sort of normalcy again. Today, Crystal lives in Idaho, I believe, with her family. She and her sisters have stayed away from the public eye, focusing on their families and personal healing. 10 years old, and the fact that he confessed to 70 other people. I know only 22 were officially confirmed, but he confessed to 70. And who's to say what he would have gone on to do if Crystal would not have survived that night. That is all I have for today's video. Thank you guys for spending time with me today and for listening to not only Crystal, but also Katie's story. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
Do you guys remember the viral video of the teenagers finding dead bodies in a suitcase while using a manifestation app? I feel like a majority of us that were on TikTok in 2020 definitely remember this. I was just thinking about this yesterday, and I realized that probably a majority of the people that saw that video don't know the victim stories or what happened afterwards. It was the summer of 2020. We were already months into lockdown, and TikTok just started to really blow up. And at the time, so was another app called Randonautica. I personally never downloaded this app, but from what I can tell, it's sort of like geocaching, like a scavenger hunt using coordinates. But with this app, Randonautica, you would manifest whatever you were looking for, and then the app would tell you where to go, and then you would find what you were manifesting to find. Videos at the time of people using the Randonautica app were going super viral. People were saying that they were manifesting to find money, and then the app would take them somewhere and they would find $20 on the ground. Or people would say in their videos that they were manifesting to find confidence, and then the app would take them to a bathroom mirror that had "You are beautiful" on it. It was that kind of thing. With some of the most viral videos showing people manifesting to find something paranormal, supernatural, or just creepy. How many of those videos were staged for views? I have no clue, but like at the time, just a lot of like scary, creepy Randonautica videos were going like super mega viral at the time. And then on June 19th, 2020, a group of teenagers from Seattle, Washington were using the Randonautica app to make their own video. They were allegedly manifesting finding money, and the app took them down by the water near Pike Place Market. And down by the water on the rocks, they found a suitcase. The group of teenagers are filming the entire thing for their TikTok video, and they're super excited that they actually found something. They were manifesting money, so they thought that maybe the suitcase was filled with cash or treasure, but as they got closer to the suitcase, they were hit with this terrible smell. One of the girls is using a stick to open up the suitcase, and inside the suitcase, there's a bunch of trash bags that are clearly filled with something, and there's just this terrible smell, and the teenagers are really starting to freak out, and they call 911. And when this video was posted, it went super viral. I saw it, I'm sure you saw it, and there was a lot of speculation that maybe this was just another staged, hoaxed Randonautica video, just hoping to get views, but that was sadly not the case. Inside of the suitcase and the surrounding area, they found 2 bodies, and those were the bodies of boyfriend and girlfriend 35-year-old Jessica Lewis and 27-year-old Austin Wenner, who was more better known as the nickname Cash or Cash Money. Jessica and Austin had been dating for about 8 years, and they had an incredibly close bond. Austin had a son. He was very loyal. He loved family. He loved music and the outdoors, and he really loved his girlfriend Jessica. Jessica was a loving, bubbly mom of 4 children. She was incredibly hardworking and selfless. She was actually working at an assisted living facility for adults with disabilities, which just really shows what a big heart Jessica had. Jessica and Austin were both shot and dismembered. Austin was shot 1 time and Jessica was shot 7 times. Jessica and Austin were living together at the time. They were actually renting a room in this guy's house. So when no one heard from either of them for a while, their family went over to this guy's house that they were renting the room at, and they went to speak with their landlord, this guy Mike Dudley, and he told the family that Jessica and Austin just took off and he had no idea where they were. This was very strange because family members noticed that in an outside trash can outside of Mike Dudley's house were a bunch of Austin's belongings and clothes. Really early on in their disappearance, and then after their bodies were found, their murder, a lot of people were suspicious of Jessica and Austin's landlord, Mike Dudley. It was no secret that they did not get along. This landlord, Mike Dudley, was charging during the 2020 lockdowns Jessica and Austin $1,500 to rent out 1 bedroom in his house. And allegedly, sometimes Jessica and Austin were late on rent, and this would cause big fights between them and their landlord, Mike. And a little look into this landlord's background showed some really horrifying things and a really disturbing past. Mike Dudley was a total creep. He had been charged with assault in the past. There were a ton of ex-girlfriends that accused him of abuse, and there were also allegations that he was involved in human trafficking. He also apparently had a history of harming and killing animals and people's pets. And then 2 years before Mike's tenants, Jessica and Austin, were murdered, his own daughter filed a restraining order against him and accused him of SAing her since she was 10 years old. So this guy is just clearly not a good guy. It was determined that Austin and Jessica were killed 10 days before their bodies were found, which would be June 9th. And on June 9th, neighbors reported hearing the sound of shots, followed by a man, likely Austin, screaming, "Don't do this, just let me go," followed by more shots. And neighbors that heard this called the police, and apparently police went out to the home of Mike, Jessica, and Austin, and then they left because no one answered the door. And as this was all coming out, a witness stepped forward with a truly terrifying story. 2 days after Jessica and Austin were killed, but before anyone knew that they were missing, before their bodies were found, their landlord, Mike, was already trying to rent out their room. He had an ad posted online and everything. This woman responded to the ad and came to look at the room. The room that this woman came to look at was Jessica and Austin's room. She said in the room, she saw bullet holes in the walls and in the furniture. She saw blood and what looked like a dead body hidden under a pile of clothes, and there was even a bloody hand sticking out underneath the pile of clothing. And when this woman went to Mike, the guy that she was trying to rent this bedroom from, and said, "There looks like there might be a dead body in the room that I'm trying to rent," Mike told her to leave and come back later because he had to clean up. And why this woman didn't immediately go to the police, I cannot tell you. I even saw reports, even though not confirmed, that she actually rented the room from Mike after all that. And then 2 months after Jessica and Austin's bodies were discovered, the police got a search warrant for Mike Dudley's home. Not only did they find those bullet holes in the room that Jessica and Austin were renting, but they also found Austin's blood. They also found a weapon in Mike's truck that matched the murder weapon. It's also obvious to the investigators that the room that Austin and Jessica lived in had been recently deep cleaned and also recently repainted. And the following day, Michael Dudley was arrested at 62 years old for 2 counts of second-degree murder, and the motive is believed to be a dispute over the rent. He denied any involvement, but in April of 2023, he was found guilty and he was sentenced to 46 years in prison, and at his age, that will be a life sentence. I was thinking about this case yesterday and I realized that probably a large majority of people that saw that original viral video probably didn't actually know who Jessica and Austin really were. I'm really interested to hear all of your thoughts. Did you ever see that viral video? What were your thoughts on it if you did see it? Did you ever use the Randonautica app? Do you remember seeing all the Randonautica videos? Do you think the app actually worked, or do you think it's a weird coincidence that it led that group of teenagers to Jessica and Austin's bodies? One thing I do find really strange, like a really weird coincidence, is allegedly the group of teenagers were using the app to manifest finding money, and Austin was known for his nickname Cash Money. I'm extremely interested to hear all your thoughts and opinions on this case, but please, please, please remember to be respectful. The loved ones of Austin and Jessica have already been through so much, so while you're in the comment section, just remember that you don't know who else could be in the comment section. Someone that actually knew Austin and Jessica in real life could be there, so just please always remember to be respectful. I actually will not tolerate anything negative about Jessica and Austin in my comment section, so I'm just letting you know that now. But while you're in the comments, please let me know what case you want to be covered next. Thank you to everyone that suggested that we covered this case today, and I will see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.